Movies favor the aesthetic of the lone survivor waking up to wander down silent, pristine city streets. But look at the layered infrastructure of a modern public square. When a severe crisis hits, millions of people attempt to flee simultaneously. That instinct to jump in a car and hit the highway creates an immediate choke point. The actual evacuation of a major transit hub guarantees a collision of vehicles, turning standard exit routes into an impassable graveyard of abandoned cars. The result of this mass exodus is not an eerie, peaceful silence. It is a deafening symphony of shattered glass, thousands of car alarms blaring without end, and absolute panic. A modern urban center relies on highly functional, continuously flowing transport systems. Once that grid ceases to operate, the sheer density of the infrastructure physically seals the exits. The behaviors that modern society rewards, moving quickly to gather supplies and seek outside assistance, create a lethal bottleneck. Collective movement during a systemic collapse traps everyone in the exact same geographical footprint. Collective panic turns a city into a suffocating prison. Relying on a vehicle for mobility in the first 24 hours is a mathematical liability. You cannot drive out of a collapse. This brings us to the concept of bugging out, grabbing a pre-packed bag and fleeing into the wild at the first sign of trouble. This has become the dominant narrative in modern survival culture. The survival industry profits heavily from this premise. They market elaborate kits stuffed with folding saws and fishing lines, selling the illusion that a single backpack guarantees safety and self-reliance in the wilderness. Experienced emergency responders and survival instructors look at the data and advise the exact opposite. Sheltering in place yields significantly better outcomes than wandering into the unknown. Abandoning a secure structure exposes an individual to immediate environmental threats. Without a planned destination, a person faces severe weather, rapid physical exhaustion, and violent conflict over the few remaining local resources. A residential home offers insulation, protection from the elements, and storage space for food and water. Trading those physical assets for a nylon tent is a severe strategic downgrade, justified only if the dwelling faces imminent destruction. Evacuating without a secure, prearranged destination, like a family farm or community shelter, does not make a person a lone survivor. Statistically, it converts them into an ill-equipped refugee. Consider the physical toll of the standard bug-out bag. A fully loaded pack typically weighs between 30 and 40 kilograms. This diagram compares a baseline human versus one carrying a 40-kilogram load. Moving that mass spikes caloric expenditure and drastically reduces velocity. The heavy pack also alters posture. It forces the individual to look down, severely restricting their field of vision and reducing situational awareness. Relying heavily on equipment introduces a dangerous psychological flaw. Believing a bag of tools guarantees survival leads to complacency regarding the actual requirements, physical fitness, and mental resilience. A kit optimized for the wilderness is dead weight in a concrete environment. A fishing kit or a folding saw offers zero utility when navigating urban gridlock or seeking shelter in an abandoned commercial district. Physical capacity, geographic luck, and the ability to read an environment dictate survival in the initial hours of a crisis. Specialized gear is a secondary asset. Government agencies frequently recommend building a 72-hour emergency kit. Preparedness experts consider this 3-day window a dangerous myth, as supply chains collapse much faster and outages routinely last for weeks. We can map the specific timeline of a grid-down scenario. Between hours 0 and 6, widespread electrical outages occur. Wi-Fi fails, cell towers overload, and communications go dark. This graph tracks degradation from 12 to 24 hours. Without electricity, municipal water pumps fail, cutting off tap water to households. Simultaneously, refrigerator temperatures rise, spoiling food. By the 72-hour mark, retail inventory plummets as the logistics model grinds to a halt. Fiction frequently relies on the apocalypse pantry trope, a lone survivor casually strolling into a pristine, fully stocked grocery store weeks after the systems fail. The reality is driven by panic buying. Modern retail operates on a just-in-time inventory system. The moment a supply chain disruption becomes apparent, retail shelves are stripped bare within hours. Without resources flowing in, these empty commercial spaces instantly become violent battlegrounds where the last remaining goods are fiercely contested. Systemic infrastructure and supply chains fracture almost immediately. Enduring a total reset requires planning for a bare minimum of 2 weeks of self-sufficiency, not 3 days. Evacuation is a last resort, governed by strict, non-negotiable triggers. A dwelling should only be abandoned if it is directly threatened by fire, flood, chemical spills, or imminent violence. Absent those specific conditions, the optimal mathematical strategy is bugging in. You reinforce an existing structure to leverage its insulation and its capacity to store long-term water and caloric reserves. Remaining inside introduces the strict requirement of noise discipline. Without the constant background hum of traffic, HVAC units, and electronics, the acoustic landscape changes entirely. Every sound carries further and becomes a beacon. This diagram illustrates a temperature inversion, a common nighttime phenomenon. Cooler air sits close to the surface, while a warmer layer of air acts as a lid. Acoustic waves bounce back down toward the ground, rather than dispersing upward, amplifying far-off sounds. In this amplified environment, standard actions become liabilities. Opening a can, rustling nylon gear, or zipping a bag can echo across a silent neighborhood, betraying your position to anyone listening. The same principle applies to visual markers. Lighting a massive signal fire on an exposed rooftop does not selectively attract rescue helicopters. It acts as a dinner bell, advertising your exact location and your access to supplies to every hostile predator in a multi-mile radius. Light discipline is equally critical indoors. A small electric flashlight or a candle in a window acts as a beacon in a pitch-black landscape. If windows lack blackout materials, your sanctuary becomes a target. The primary function of a viable sanctuary is not heroic defense against a siege. It is maintaining a zero-profile footprint, ensuring the location remains geographically remote and completely uninteresting to anyone passing by. Apocalyptic fiction relies heavily on the premise that the moment laws vanish, society immediately devolves into a violent, every-man-for-himself wasteland. Sociological data tells a completely different story. Disaster case studies consistently document a phenomenon known as catastrophe compassion, noting that property and violent crime rates often decrease following a severe crisis. In the absence of civil systems, the overwhelming majority of people respond with generosity. Strangers rely on each other and form cooperative networks rather than devolving into looting hordes. The true danger often lies in the false hope fortress. This is the allure of a looped radio broadcast promising a heavily armed safe sanctuary. Surrendering your autonomy and weapons to an isolated faction promising safety usually results in imprisonment, not rescue. When survival groups fail, it is rarely due to inherent human savagery. They collapse from within due to rigid authoritarian leadership, poor communication, and a lack of established social trust. Long-term disaster resilience requires social capital. An individual node is vulnerable, but connecting with neighbors builds a viable safety net. Community cooperation enables the pooling of critical resources. Sharing skills across a network mitigates the burden of massive individual stockpiles. The data directly contradicts the isolationist lone wolf fantasy marketed by popular culture. Surviving a total reset requires extreme cooperation, not extreme isolation. Enduring the first 90 days relies on precise execution, establishing a clear evacuation trigger, securing weeks of stored calories, and strictly maintaining profile discipline. True preparedness is a rigorous exercise in logistics, adaptability, and human connection. When modern systems fail, your neighbors are your greatest asset.